and today we're going to be fixing my car, in the process replacing an oxygen sensor, and discovering and fixing a vacuum leak in the engine. So let's get started. A while back I saw a check engine light on my car, and I decided I wanted to fix this problem myself, so I drove down to the local auto parts store, in this case O'Reilly's, to borrow their OBD scanner. Now if you don't know, you can go to most auto parts stores and borrow an OBD scanner. Now, an OBD scanner is this device that plugs into a little port underneath your car's dashboard and allows you to access and read the contents of your car's computer system to diagnose different problems that were wrong with it. In this video, you'll notice me using the OBD reader that I was borrowing from O'Reilly's Auto Parts, as well as an OBD reader that I was borrowing from my neighbor. Now, after entering the make and model of my car and navigating to the screen that shows the error code, I was able to see that I had a P0171 error code, which means that bank 1 of the car is running lean. Now in my car, because it's only a 4-cylinder car, there's only one bank, but in cars with 6 or 8 cylinders, there are 2 banks. Now, what it means when it's running lean is it means that there is either too much oxygen inside the engine or too little fuel. Now, there can be a wide variety of different factors that cause this. So, in the OBD reader, I navigated to a screen called the freeze frame, which takes a snapshot of all the car's vital signs, per se, at the time when the error code was registered, when the check engine light turned on. I was able to see from here that the car was driving at 10 miles an hour. You can also see that it was running for a little bit as the coolant was 160 degrees. And the most important thing is the fact that the fuel trims are strange. In a typical car, the long-term and short-term fuel trims should add up to around 0%, plus or minus 5. But you see here that my fuel trims were adding up to around 21%, which is bad. It means the car is adding too much extra fuel into the engine, causing those problems, like a lack of efficiency, a lack of power, and a lack of good gas mileage. And so, wanting to get some more information, I navigated to the section of the OBD scanner called Live Data Stream, which will show you the live data that's coming from the car at that very moment. So I went there, and I noticed that, of course, the fuel trims were still very high, and then I could also see some more information. Now, not knowing exactly what to do at this moment, I went to the internet and started researching some things, and I found that the cause for a P0171 error code, as well as high fuel trims, can be a wide variety of things. One being a vacuum leak, where there's a hole in some of the vacuum hoses, allowing excess air to come in the engine. And 2, oxygen sensors going bad. Now here I think it's important to note that my car has 2 different types of oxygen sensors. The first type is a wideband oxygen sensor, and this one is placed upstream in the oxygen system, which means before the catalytic converter and after the engine. This one is labeled as O2S11 on the OBD scanner. A wideband oxygen sensor is able to more accurately read the oxygen to fuel ratio in the exhaust, and it outputs this reading in milliamps, where if it's reading 0 milliamps, then the oxygen to fuel ratio is exactly 14.71 to 1. The other type of oxygen sensor is the narrowband O2 sensor, and this one is found after the catalytic converter, and it outputs this reading in volts, where if it's reading at exactly 0.45 volts, then the oxygen to fuel ratio is that perfect one. The upstream oxygen sensor is most important because it takes its reading and it's able to send that to the engine's computer, which helps it calculate how much fuel to add to the engine. The downstream oxygen sensor is really there just to see if the catalytic converter is functioning. The upstream oxygen sensor typically looks like it's oscillating around a certain set point, that set point being the perfect stoichiometric ratio of 14.71 to 1. Where if it's a narrowband oxygen sensor, it's oscillating around 0.45 volts. If it's a wideband oxygen sensor, it's oscillating around 0 milliamps, which in my case, it was. And the downstream oxygen sensor should be a constant reading. If it's oscillating like the first one, that means the catalytic converter is bad. So, back to my other part of the story. Looking at these graphs, I misinterpreted looking at the downstream oxygen sensors looking at the upstream oxygen sensor, which you can see would be a problem. I thought the sensor was burnt out. And so I went into the auto parts store and I asked the person, and I showed him the graph, and he was like, yeah, you need to get a new oxygen sensor. I was like, okay, maybe that'll fix it. So I bought this oxygen sensor, which is expensive by the way, and completely unneeded. My oxygen sensor is working fine. Now, if you're here to learn how to install a new upstream oxygen sensor on your 2003 Honda Accord, this is how you do it. Alright, so I'm underneath the car right now. You can see that is the downstream oxygen sensor. You can see this follows the exhaust pipe out to here, where the upstream oxygen sensor is. You can see this plugs straight into the exhaust pipe as it's coming out of the engine. I'm going to try to unscrew this old one. Oh, this is hard. Oh, that's not a good sound. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Got it loose. So now I can see that I can simply go in there and unscrew it. Oh, there we go. Ooh, thing looks mighty crusty. I'm now going to apply this anti-lock grease. There we go. That looks good. I'm going to put this back into the hole and screw it in. So if you go up here, this is the plug I just replaced. That wire goes to the clip. You can see where it switches from black to blue, and then that wire goes up. My hands are pretty dirty now, and you're not really fixing a car until your hands are dirty. As you can see, it's raining pretty hard outside. Let's see what the new sensor looks like inside there. If you look down there, that little wire coming out, that's the new sensor. And you can see a blue wire, that's the plug that it goes into. Cool. Now you wouldn't guess this, but as soon as I started up my car afterwards, the problem was still the exact same. And so I had a perfectly good oxygen sensor on my hands, which I'll use in my next video when I hook it up to my lawnmower, and a car that still wasn't working correctly. So I was looking back at some of my research, and I found that one of the most common problems that causes fuel trims to run high and a P0171 error code is a vacuum leak in the engine. And so there's a couple ways to find this. One of them involves having propane and putting it in your engine, which kind of seems a little bit dangerous, or building a smoke machine, or buying an expensive one. So I decided to go that route. So I made a smoke machine out of a mason jar filled with mineral oil and a little heater element inside. This heater element would vaporize the mineral oil and cause smoke to form. The smoke could then be pumped into the engine. Now to find this vacuum leak, I first removed the air filter on the car and the place where the air filter connects to the engine. This is a good place to apply my smoke. Now to fit the small hose where the smoke was coming out of to the large air intake hose of the car, I had to use a glove and some rubber bands, and it worked. After I started pumping smoke into the car, I could see the exact place where it was coming out of the air intake hose. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's right there. Here, turn on. Can you get out your phone flashlight? Look, it's that little streamlined hole right there. Ooh. Oh, hold up. Okay, my glass just cracked, but we know where the leak is. Look at that. The whole thing cracked. That's pretty cool, actually. Alright, so look at that. That's the vacuum leak. So now that I found that leak, it's time to fix it with a new air intake hose, which luckily the auto parts store had on stock. It was their last one. So I went about installing that and fixing that leak. Now, after getting everything fixed and put back together, I got in my car, started it, plugged in the OBD scanner, hoping to see my car work perfectly, which, as you may have guessed, didn't happen. The fuel trims improved, but they weren't perfect. Before it was getting like 41% fuel trims while idling and 20% while driving, and now it was down to only like 15% fuel trims while idling and like 6 or 7% fuel trims while driving, which is definitely improvement, but it's still not what I wanted it to be. It still means there's another problem in the engine. So I hooked it up to my smoke system again and didn't find a vacuum leak. There just wasn't another one. Which means that the problem now is Maybe something to do with the fuel injectors, the fuel pump, perhaps the mass airflow sensor, although it looked clean to me. But something that I will continue to look for and try to discover. So I may make a future video on that. But for now, stay tuned for my next video. I'll be using that oxygen sensor that I replaced and building a circuit to read its output and then hooking it up to a lawnmower. A good way to use that perfectly good oxygen sensor. So stay tuned for that, and I hope you have a great day.